said, it's very, very old. It's one of the oldest ballets that is still performed in pretty much its original form. The only ballet that's older is La Sylphide, which is from 1830. And both Giselle and La Sylphide were and are the great exemplars of romantic ballet. When we say romantic ballet, we don't mean romantic as in love, we mean romantic as in romanticism, as in the plot hinges upon the fantastic, upon fantasy, upon the supernatural. So if you take a quick look at the plot of Giselle, there's a young Charlemagne girl. Anyway, there's a duke, and he has a son, of course, and he has a castle, and usually you can see up on the backdrop, you can see the duke's castle up on the hill, and down in the valley, where the peasants labor to produce the grapes and everything, lives Giselle in her cottage with her mother, and her boyfriend Hilarion, who her mother desperately wants her to marry, and the duke's son comes traipsing through the village looking for things to kill. Happens upon Giselle, falls in love with her, they have an affair. That affair is subsequently discovered not only by her boyfriend, by Hilarion, but by his fiancée. And usually in the program it says something antiseptic like Giselle loses her reason and dies. What really happens is, or at least the way I like to see the ballet, she commits suicide because she feels, I think she makes a choice. I will not live in a world where this kind of betrayal happens. We know from the outset, Giselle's mother warns her, you love to dance, you love to imagine, you love beautiful, fantastic things, you're always dancing, you're never really, we don't see Giselle going out to harvest grapes. We see her dancing with all her friends. She's hiding from her mum, who's trying to get her, knuckle down, be a good little peasant. But Giselle's not like that. She has an imaginative life. And when she is so, she should have known better, right? It's not like it's 1970. This is 1400. Dukes and peasants don't marry. She should have known that, but she didn't, because she's living in her own little fantasy land, and she chooses to be dead rather than to live in a world that she finds is ugly and impossible. So then we move along to the second act, and it turns out that she's not the only one who has made this kind of choice when confronted with a betrayal. And we're told that there are these spirits called willies, who are the souls of young women who have committed suicide, who have died without being hallowed by the church, because either they were physically defiled, or they committed suicide, but in any case they're not very happy with men. And it's really important in some, as I said, sometimes that's kind of sanitized, that she loses her reason and dies, and she has a weak heart and she has a heart attack. That would not get her into the church's bad books. She gets buried out in the forest, and that's where all these willies always show up. All these unhappy women buried in the graveyard. They don't have headstones, and in many versions of Giselle, you'll see that at the beginning of the second act, Hilarion, Giselle's boyfriend, her peasant boyfriend, is actually putting a cross at the head of her grave, because otherwise she would lie in unhallowed ground. There are many of these girls, and at midnight they all come up out of their unhallowed graves, and if they catch any guys walking through the forest, they force them to dance until they die. Hilarion is there, feeling miserable about the fact that he contributed to Giselle's death. She would have found out eventually. But, Hilarion feels terribly guilty that he was the one who exposed the betrayal. He was the proximate cause of Giselle's suicide. So there he is, trying to put a cross on her grave and make some amends. He gets caught by the willies, they dance him to death, he dies. And then, lo and behold, Albrecht shows up, who is also suffering enormous pangs of regret and feeling that he's done something terribly wrong. And the willies start to dance him to death as well. But Giselle, even though she's, she has no physical form anymore, and you could have a lot of fun imagining, why did these men, how guilty are they that these spirits actually have such power over them. What is actually going on in their minds? Do those women really exist, or is that guilt, you know, that's making you run hither and yon, and you know, you have a heart attack from the inability to rest, the inability to be at peace with what you've done. Giselle forgives Albrecht, and she shows her forgiveness by trying to protect him from her sisters, who would rather see him die. And first she sends Albrecht to stand by the grave where Hilarion has put the cross, because, you know, the Willies have no power there. But the Queen of the Willies makes Giselle dance on her own, and of course Albrecht wants to support her, wants to be with her, so he walks out of the circle that's protected by the cross, and, you know, now the Willies can make him dance. But he's, you know, of strong heart, and plus Giselle's belief in him, of course, is very strengthening to him. So he survives until 4 a.m., and we hear the bells chime 4 a.m., and the dawn comes up, and the Willies have to go back to their graves, and Albrecht is saved. What I love about this ballet, I actually think the ballet should be called Albrecht. I don't know, I mean, people talk about Giselle being, you know, the ballet dancer's Hamlet. You know, if you had an ex-Giselle up here talking to you, she might be able to tell you very convincingly how complex Giselle's character is. To me, it's not so complex. As I said, I think she's a girl who lives in her own head, and I do think she makes the choice to kill herself, and I think that has a certain courage. I think in a way, she's the first modern heroine. You know, and you have to think when this ballet happened. This ballet happened in 1832. In 1830, there were revolutions all across Europe, which were basically about you cannot be the king of France anymore, you have to be the king of the French, and we will elect you and we will put you in power, but you are responsible to us. It is no longer a question of absolute monarchy. We are now, we the people, even though we haven't got any ideas really, we don't want to do that crazy American thing, you know, that messy democracy, but we don't anymore want to be ruled absolutely. And then this ballet comes along where this, I mean, the right of first night, you know, existed since whenever, right? Albrecht shouldn't have to apologize to Giselle at all. You know, he took his pleasure where he found it, and so what? She's a peasant. After 1830, not anymore. Right. So Giselle's choice not to live under a system she doesn't believe in is actually very, very current with what was happening politically, you know, around that period. Even though the ballet is set in 1400, it could actually be set in 1832. You know, there were counts, and there were dukes, and there were cads running around breaking young girls' hearts, and most of them just had their hearts broken and went on with their lives. So for Giselle to stand up and say, no, it's enough, I choose rather to be dead than to live in this society, was a very revolutionary idea. And, you know, I say the ballet should be called Albrecht because it's, you know, the person who has the big psychological wake-up call for me is Albrecht. I always tried when I did Albrecht to come to the village as, you know, sow your wild oats. You know, I don't really care about Giselle. All the girls in the village are pretty. Giselle just happens to be more willing. You know, I never felt guilt until that moment when my noble fiancé would walk on stage and say, "What have you been doing?" And I didn't feel guilty that I'd been, you know, I tried to imagine in my mind, I'm not guilty because I've been sleeping with the wrong girl. I'm guilty because I got caught. You know, and so that was the first, you know, I've made a faux pas. You know, this is socially awkward. And then watching Giselle, you know, descend into madness and, you know, choose to kill herself, you know, it's only in that moment, you know, and I used to, you know, try to set myself, this is the first time I've ever seen death. I've killed lots of animals, but they didn't count. And I suddenly realized my role in that, and now suddenly I'm guilty. And now I have to go to the second act, and I have to pray at her grave, and I have to wish there is some way I could go on with my life. And Giselle comes back from the grave, and she says to Albrecht, "You must go on. You know, you are responsible for. You are the Duke's son. You are going to rule this duchy. Anyway, you must go on." You know, that's a very interesting roller coaster to be on for a couple of hours. And so I should talk a little bit about the conventions of romantic ballet, apart from the fact that there is always an act where there is a core of women who are supernatural beings, and sometimes they're good guys and sometimes they're bad guys. In Giselle, the Willies are definitely the bad guys. Because they are supernatural, there were two things for sure that were invented that without which the romantic ballet could not have happened. One of those was the point shoe, and the other one of those was gaslight. And probably, you know, the revolution of 1830 probably had a hell of a lot before that period. People were not interested in stories about the supernatural or the common man or whatever. It was all about kings and you know, Grecian heroes and Roman heroes, and these folk tales were considered déclassé. We didn't, you know, people who had money to go to the theater didn't care about the stories that the peasantry told around their fires. Suddenly, those stories became interesting, and we developed gaslight. So suddenly, you could put things on stage that were that had this blue, foggy, misty glow. You could imagine being out on the moor at night, and if you've ever been out on a moor at night and the fog rises up, it's scary. I had no experience of the natural world. This was incredibly exotic and dangerous and fascinating. The other thing that was discovered was the point shoe. Point shoes now weigh 13 or 14 ounces. In 1832, a point shoe weighed 4 ounces. So it was basically a cloth slipper with a leather sole. And the woman who discovered that she could in fact support her weight on the end of her foot did that by putting cloth around the shoe in a very tight way, so that it's, you know, like wearing a very, very tight glove. You know, if you really smash your fingers together, you can imagine they have much more strength than if you're really very tight mitten, right? Instead of gloves, right? So point shoes are a glove that allows each individual toe to support the other, and with extraordinary amounts of training, you can actually support your weight on that very, very small platform. In a way, we now take this for granted. Even people who have never been to the ballet know about point shoes. They know that ballerinas dance on the tips of their toes, and we don't really think about it, but it had never, ever, ever been done before. So this was an extraordinary, revolutionary thing. The thing that was even more extraordinary about it was we think of point work as being so delicate, and you know, if you go to a ballet history class, they tell you, oh, it was all about being ethereal and it was all about being weightless. If you read Marie Taglioni's diaries, who was the woman who invented point work, no, it was about power. It was about women taking control. It was about, she would do, this is called a grand plie. She would do 100 of those for her warm-up because she needed to be that strong. Her father, who was her teacher, would go with her in the studio for 6 or 7 hours a day, you know, before she went to rehearsal. I mean, the training that this woman went through to be able to do this never before seen technical feat. She was hardcore. You know, she was very brave. She was very strong, and she was very committed. Not exactly the picture that we like to present, we white males like to present of 19th century women. But every time I look at Giselle and I think, all these people that I work with every day go through that amount of training, that amount of, there have been studies done that show that female ballet dancers have the highest pain tolerance of any population on the face of the earth. It blows my mind, you know, and you ask the average female ballet dancer, does it hurt to go on point? They say, oh yeah, but you get used to it. There's a very strange mix of restriction, of choosing what could be a very limiting technology, and actually making that a source of strength and power. And when you look at the corps de ballet of Giselle, and you see the power that those women, because they work together, because they have chosen this very demanding physical requirement, they have a sense of purpose, and they have a sense of sisterhood, and they have a way of being together that gives them power, also in the story, but also in real life, over all these men. And I think that had never, ever, ever been seen before. There was not we women together who have been wronged will bond together, and we will change the world. We will make you pay. And I think that was possibly the most revolutionary aspect of the entire ballet. Yeah, things I love about Giselle, that's certainly one of them.